This house was never yours. You were just the leftover child. That was what my mother said at my sister's wedding. Her voice carried across the ballroom as though she wanted every guest to hear. A thick folder with gold lettering, Estate of Margaret. $10 million slid onto the table in front of me. The cover snapped shut with a sound that echoed louder than the music. I sat there, fingers pressed against the folder, as the waiters bustled past with champagne flutes. Around me, laughter bubbled. My sister Sloane raised her glass to the camera streaming live on her phone. She was radiant, bathed in soft white light. While I was being nudged from the family's table toward a smaller one near the catering station, they said it was full at the front, but I knew better. Humiliation stung sharper than the chill from the air conditioning. My name card, embossed in silver, had been replaced with another cousin's name. I picked it up, turned it over, and slipped it into my pocket. That was the only place I seemed to belong that night out of sight. I kept my hand on my gallery keys in my lap. No one had asked me about my work. Not even in passing. They had asked about Sloane's honeymoon, about Trent's promotion, about my parents' upcoming trip to Italy. I was invisible, except for this one moment when my existence was necessary to sign something, to relinquish something, to make room for their performance of togetherness. The band played a jazz standard. Couples twirled under chandeliers. My father leaned toward me, lips barely moving. "Be gracious. Don't make a scene." He said it like a warning, like a debt collector's reminder. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile people mistake for agreement. But inside, the walls of memory pressed hard. I remembered the last time I heard them divide up belongings. It was me they had divided. Or rather, discarded. I would explain that later. For now, I stayed quiet, watching them clink glasses and embrace guests as if they had never left me behind. The heat of the spotlight, the shine of sequins, the chatter of cousins, all of it blurred into one lesson. Family gatherings were less about love, more about choreography. Appearances had to be maintained. My humiliation was part of their performance. My silence was the curtain that allowed the show to go on. Still, there was something they did not know. That folder in front of me was not the only piece of paper that mattered. But I'll explain that later. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money. When I was a child, people used to say we were a normal family. A brick house on a quiet street. Sunday dinners. Birthday balloons taped to mismatched chairs. I believed it. The way children believe the sun will always rise. I was 8 when that belief cracked. My father, Gideon, lost a major contract. He came home with dust in his hair, hands trembling. My mother, Marla, scolded him behind a closed door. But her words filtered down the hallway. "You bet everything on one deal. You've ruined us." His voice rumbled back, low and raw. That was the first night he slept on the couch. At breakfast, the air was heavy. My brother Trent poked at his eggs. My sister Sloane hummed as if nothing had changed. And I watched my parents' silence stretch like a rope about to snap. Bills arrived daily. I knew by the way my mother's jaw tightened as she opened envelopes. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital. My father spent hours on the phone. Voice rising, voice falling. I heard him whisper one night, "I don't know how we'll make the mortgage. Savings are gone. Diane's shifts barely cover utilities." His fear was more terrifying than any monster I had imagined hiding in my closet. Sloane was 6 then, curls bouncing as she clung to my arm. "Read me the elephant story again." She'd beg, holding her worn stuffed toy. I would do the voices until her eyelids fluttered shut. Trent was 10, retreating into baseball cards, pretending not to notice the storm. But the storm grew louder. My parents fought about money, about loyalty, about each other. One evening, my father punched a hole in the wall. We children huddled together on my bed, Trent wrapping his arms around us while plaster dust still floated in the air. Soon after, I found divorce papers in my mother's purse. I had been looking for gum, not legal language. Words like custody and dissolution carved themselves into my mind. I understood enough our family was being split like furniture. One piece here, one piece there. I overheard them one night, dividing us. Trent should come with me. He needs a man. My father said. Fine. But Sloan stays with me. My mother replied. I waited for one of them to mention me. The silence was my answer. When my father packed bags and left with Trent, he barely looked at me. Be good for your mom, he said. My brother whispered. I'll call you soon. But the promise trembled on his lips. A week later, my mother carried Sloan's clothes into a suitcase. We're going to Aunt Lisa's for a while, she told me, eyes fixed on the floor. You'll stay here. We'll come back. Sloan sobbed, reaching for me. Why can't Clara come? My mother's voice cut like a knife. Clara needs to stay in case your father returns. And then they were gone. I was 8 years old and alone in the house. At first, I treated it like a game. I ate ice cream for breakfast. I jumped on their bed. But the fun wore thin as night fell. Every creak in the walls sounded like a warning. I left all the lights on, slept with the dog curled at my feet. By the third day, the milk was sour. Bread was stale. I shared crackers with the dog, dialing numbers that went unanswered. My father's phone, my mother's phone, even Aunt Lisa's house. Nothing. I left messages, please come back. I'm scared. Silence swallowed them whole. On the fourth day, there was a knock. Mrs. Garcia, the neighbor, stood there with worried eyes. I tried to lie, said my mother had just gone to the store. But the dog pushed past me. Ribs showing. Mrs. Garcia saw through everything. Where are your parents? Sweetheart. That was the moment I broke. I told her the truth between sobs. Dad took Trent. Mom took Sloan. Nobody took me. Within hours, a social worker sat in her living room, asking questions I could not answer. Do you know where they went? Do you have relatives nearby? I shook my head. That night, I packed a few clothes, clutched my stuffed bear, and watched as the dog was taken to the shelter. A week later, a judge declared me a ward of the state. Neither of my parents showed up in court. Just like that, I was no longer part of a family. I was a case number. That was the first betrayal. The deepest cut, not the fights, not the bills, not the cracked walls. It was the moment I realized both of them had looked at the pieces of our family and decided I was the piece they could live without. People say children are resilient. Perhaps. But resilience often grows from abandonment. I carried that truth like a stone in my pocket. Heavy. Unseen. Always there. And here is where the past begins to fold into the present. Because years later, at that wedding, when my mother called me the leftover child, I knew she wasn't inventing the insult. She was repeating history. My first foster placement was with the Thompsons. They were not cruel, but they were not kind either. They had 3 children of their own, plus me in the basement family room on a pull-out couch. My clothes stayed in a black garbage bag because there was no dresser space. Their children never spoke to me except to tell me I was in their way. I tried writing letters to Trent and Sloan. I wrote page after page, telling them I missed them, asking when we would be together again. I mailed them to Aunt Lisa's house, the only address I knew. Weeks later, the envelopes came back stamped return to sender. One evening, I managed to borrow the phone. A woman's voice answered when I asked for my father. He cannot come to the phone, she said sharply. I told her my name. His daughter. There was a pause. Then I'll tell him you called. The line went dead. He never called back. That silence taught me another truth. Sometimes people want to forget you. After 6 months, The Thompsons decided they wanted to focus on their own children. I was packed off again. Garbage bag slung over my shoulder. The next house was the Ramirezes. A crowded place with 5 other foster kids. The rules were endless bathroom schedules, chore charts, time limits for homework. I shared a bunk bed with 2 girls I barely knew. Food was scarce. Tempers shorter. Older boy. Damon stole my bracelet, the only gift I had from Mrs. Garcia before I left her street. When I threatened to tell, he sneered. Go ahead. I'll say you broke the rules. I learned then to weigh which losses I could live with. Social workers came and went. Each one new. Each one reading from the same thin file. They asked if I felt safe, if I had enough to eat, if I was going to school. I said yes. Because no was dangerous. No could mean another move. Another garbage bag. Another house where I was unwanted. By the time I was 14, I had counted 4 homes. Some worse than others. The Williamses gave me my own room. But Mrs. Williams found fault in everything: my grades, my hair, the way I walked. No wonder your parents didn't want you, she once said, smiling while she drove me to school. Words like that cut deeper than hunger. The Jacksons were the worst. Food locked away. Punishments that meant going to bed with nothing. At 14, I ran away. Spent 3 nights sleeping on a park bench. Stealing crackers from a grocery store. The police brought me back. And the Jacksons refused to keep me. It was around then that a high school counselor noticed something in me. She told me I was bright. Despite the chaos, she pressed me to take harder classes, to think about college. She gave me a glimpse of something beyond survival. My next placement was with Miss Harriet, an older woman who had fostered dozens of teens. Her house was small. Her rules steady. Dinner at 6. Homework until 8. Reading until lights out at 10. She never asked me to call her mom. Never pretended. But she showed up to every conference. Checked my homework. Bought me sketch pads when she saw me doodling on the edges of notebooks. For the first time, I felt something like stability. Not love. Exactly. But respect. When I was 17, Miss Harriet was diagnosed with cancer. She told me over breakfast. Her hands steady on her teacup. 6 months. Maybe less. My chest clenched. But she went on calmly. You will need a new placement. But you'll finish school. That is what matters. I spent those months holding her hand in hospice, reading aloud from her favorite books. When she died, I felt a grief sharper than I had known. She had not saved me from the system, but she had given me structure, and that structure had given me hope. 2 months later, I turned 18. A high school diploma in one hand, a scholarship for foster youth in the other, and $752 saved from part-time jobs. That was all. No family to call. No home to return to. I rented a corner in a small apartment with 3 other students in Chicago. It was cramped, noisy, and mine. I worked mornings at a diner, evenings in a store. Slept maybe 5 hours a night. But the exhaustion was different. It had purpose. Each paycheck, each credit earned at community college, was a brick in a foundation I was building myself. In an art history class, a professor noticed my sketches and encouraged me. For the first time, I wondered if art could be more than a private escape. He helped me apply for scholarships, pushed me to build a portfolio. By my 2nd year, I transferred to a university with a full scholarship. I made friends. Real friends. People who invited me to their homes for holidays. Zoe, my roommate, once said, "You never talk about your family." I shrugged. Don't have one. She didn't pity me. Didn't press. She simply said, "Then you can share mine." That kind of generosity felt like sunlight after years underground. Piece by piece, I built a life that was mine, not borrowed, not conditional. And still, the stone stayed in my pocket, the memory of being left behind. It grew heavier each time I saw a happy family at the gallery, each time I passed a park where parents cheered for their children. So when that wedding invitation arrived, embossed and glittering, I felt the weight of that stone again. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I went. Because sometimes we walk back into the fire, not to be burned again, but to prove we can stand in the flames and not disappear. The invitation had said black tie, and the estate had always been one of those old Chicago manors that seemed too grand for any single family to occupy comfortably. The ballroom was ornate, with chandeliers that reflected the soft winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I stepped in, the envelope of documents in my hand, my heart tight but steady. Gideon and Marlo were there, perfectly composed, or at least performing composure for the gathered guests. Sloane twirled past me, the golden dress catching the light. Smiling for cameras and phones alike, Trent lingered near their side. Cautious, polite, aware that tonight would be a stage, and I was expected to play my role. The lawyer, a stern woman named Miss Caldwell, motioned for everyone to sit. She had previously reviewed my folder, the notarized estate documents, the bank emails, the proofs of unauthorized transfers. Every item in my possession had been checked, stamped, and verified. I would like to begin. Miss, Caldwell said, her tone commanding. The documents presented tonight pertain to the final testament and trust of the late Margaret L. Winters. My mother's eyes flickered. My father's hand trembled slightly as he gripped his glass. They had expected compliance. Silence. Obedience. They had misjudged the girl they left behind. I placed my folder on the podium. These documents are accurate, legally verified, and reflect my rights as the primary beneficiary. Unauthorized transfers of $260,000 have been frozen under my attorney's instructions. Any attempt to alter this estate without my consent will be contested. A faint gasp rippled through the room. Some of the cousins exchanged quick whispers, and Sloane's face paled as she glanced at her phone. Social media already had cameras capturing everything, every whispered insult, every smirk, every glance that revealed their expectations. You should sign, my mother whispered as I met her gaze. For the family? I did not answer. I had learned long ago that no word of mine could erase the past. But the truth, documented and enforced by law, could protect my future? I spoke then, deliberately, my voice calm, each word precise. I am not here for performance. I am not here to be invisible. I am not here to accept guilt for decisions that left me abandoned as a child. You left me behind. You moved on. You expected me to be a prop? To bow. To smile. To pretend. I am 33 years old. And I am not that child anymore. The murmurs in the ballroom grew louder. My father tried to interject. Clara, I am not finished, I said, lifting my head. All communications, all transfers, all attempts to modify the trust without my knowledge have been documented and submitted to my lawyer. Every email, every timestamp, every transaction. I am enforcing my rights not in anger, not in vengeance, but because this is my life, and this is my inheritance. Sloane whispered to my mother, panic creeping into her voice. My mother's composure faltered. Trent looked at the floor, uneasy. Their carefully orchestrated plan of control had crumbled in the quiet authority of verified documentation. Miss, Caldwell continued, temporary injunctions have been granted. The estate and trust will be managed under court supervision until all legal questions are resolved. Any public statements made or transactions attempted outside these parameters will be contested. I gathered my folder and stepped away from the podium, the weight of decades of abandonment finally lifting slightly. My humiliation when Sloane had spilled champagne on my dress had been reframed as my moment of clarity. I had not lost. I had reclaimed, with law and reason as my allies, what was rightfully mine. Outside the estate, Chicago's winter air was crisp. I inhaled deeply. For years, I had carried fear, resentment, humiliation. Tonight, I carried neither. The storm had passed. The days after the estate gathering were quieter than I expected. My parents attempted to reach me repeatedly, emails, phone calls, even messages through distant relatives. But I responded through my lawyer only when necessary. I had learned the value of distance and patience. Melavier, Miss Caldwell, guided every step. We filed the formal temporary injunctions in probate court. The bank confirmed all transfers had been frozen. The family company's shares could not be moved without my written consent. Every attempt by my mother to circumvent these measures had been anticipated. Meanwhile, social media did its part. An anonymous tip to a local Chicago journalist, corroborated by screenshots and photos, resulted in an article titled "Chicago Heiress Reclaims Family Estate Parents Attempt to Rewrite History." Comments flooded in support. Outrage. Admiration. My story, once invisible, had become public, but not sensationalized by me. The law and the facts did that. Sloane's panic was palpable. She texted, frantique, begging me to resolve matters quietly. I responded only once. All is being handled legally. Gideon called finally, voice low and strained. Clara, we thought we were protecting the family. I did not reply. Protection, I realized, had meant exclusion, betrayal, and abandonment. Silence was their weapon now. It was mine. Weeks later, in private sessions with Miss Caldwell, we reviewed every email, every transfer, every document. The legal system moved at its own pace, slower than the impulse of revenge, but more effective. By the end of the month, temporary measures had become semi-permanent. My rights were recognized, my inheritance secure, and my dignity intact. I walked through my gallery that evening, the space that had been mine even before the legal vindication. Paintings by struggling young artists, sculptures crafted from humble materials, they reminded me that creation, patience, and persistence could triumph over neglect. Revenge had not been dramatic, nor bloody, nor loud. It had been precise. It had been patient. It had been lawful. And it had been mine. I poured a glass of wine and raised it quietly. Not to them, not to the media, not to the guests who had witnessed my humiliation. I raised it to myself for survival, for clarity, for justice achieved not through anger, but through steadfast resolve. Tonight, the girl left behind at 8 years old would sleep peacefully. The woman I had become had reclaimed her story. The days that followed were quiet, almost serene. My parents stopped calling. Sloane stopped texting. And Trent avoided my emails. For the first time in decades, I could breathe without expectation, without performance, without watching my back. The legal battle was settled, the trust frozen, the transfers reversed, the company's shares secure. Justice, when slow and deliberate, felt more like liberation than vengeance. I returned to my gallery the next morning and walked through the space with a lightness I had never felt. Paintings by young artists filled the walls. Sculptures crowded the corners. I ran my fingers over the surfaces of works created by hands that had known struggle, that had clawed their way to creation. I understood them because I had been like them, overlooked, underestimated, left to build something from nothing. In the quiet of my office, I placed the folder on the shelf where it belonged. The documents no longer felt like weapons, they were reminders. Proof that the life I had built was mine. Every late night studying, every shift at the diner, every scraped knee from childhood, all of it mattered. All of it had led to this moment where I could stand unbowed. The house was mine. The trust was mine. The shares were mine. But more importantly, I realized that my peace was mine. I had chosen it, nurtured it, fought for it. For so long, I had equated family with obligation, love with approval, survival with silence. Tonight, I knew that freedom, true freedom, was choosing who I allowed into my life and on what terms. I thought about my mother's note, still tucked into the folder. I should have kept you safe. I'm so sorry. Clara, please call when you're ready. Her words were an admission, a gesture of regret. But they did not carry the power they once might have. I had already reclaimed my story. Forgiveness, if it came, would not be demanded by them, nor would it be proof of my worth. Instead, I focused on the life I had cultivated. I poured more energy into the gallery, connecting with artists, mentoring students, hosting exhibitions that celebrated talent and resilience. I started a small scholarship for foster youth, naming it after Miss Harriet, the woman who had first shown me that care and consistency mattered. I was creating something lasting, something that could not be stolen, hidden, or disregarded. I began to rebuild my family on my terms. Friends who had stood by me became family. Zoe, my roommate and confidant, was there for every decision, every challenge, every triumph. Marcus, Elena, and David, the people who had laughed with me, supported me, and celebrated my successes, were my siblings now. Vacant brunches, holiday dinners, impromptu dance parties in my tiny apartment. All reminders that chosen family could be more dependable than blood. When I received the formal invitation for a post-wedding family gathering, a lake house weekend intended as a reconciliation, I declined. I responded politely, carefully. I would continue to see Sloane and Trent individually, if they wished, but I would not subject myself to the theatrical reunion of a family that had once abandoned me. My boundaries were firm, and I felt no guilt. Sloane texted me a photograph of the lake house. Snow on the roofs, lights glowing warmly. We all want you there. It won't be the same without you. I read it and felt the old sting of longing. But I also felt strength. The lake house held memories of my childhood. Yes, but it also held echoes of betrayal. My presence there would not heal those wounds. It would simply reopen them. I spent the evening in my apartment, painting. My brush swept over the canvas, tracing arcs of color that represented abandonment, resilience, betrayal, and healing. Abstract forms collided and resolved. Jagged lines softened into curves. Dark colors blended into light. This series, this work, became my voice when words could not suffice. My emotions, once trapped inside me, finally found shape and motion. Months later, I met Sloane for coffee. Just the two of us. Neutral ground. Quiet and unpressured. She spoke openly about her struggles growing up with a mother who battled depression and a stepfather who, though kind, could not understand the dynamics of their blended family. I listened, occasionally offering advice, sometimes simply sitting with her as she unraveled old pain. Our relationship, tentative and fragile, was built on who we were now, not the children we had been. Even my father reached out, cautiously. Months later, his health had deteriorated further. I failed you, he said in a voice softer than I had expected. Not just when you were 8, but every day after. I cannot change it, but I want you to know that I know. I did not respond immediately. Forgiveness was not his to request. But hearing him acknowledge the truth mattered in its own quiet way. And so, I continued to live. I curated. I created. I mentored. I celebrated holidays with my chosen family. I explored new exhibitions, traveled to shows, and spent evenings reading by the window in my apartment. The city lights painting the walls. My childhood was a memory, not a chain. The abandonment, the betrayal, the humiliation, they were chapters, not definitions. I kept 2 photographs side by side on my gallery office desk. One, the picture Sloane had kept from my 6th birthday, showing a gap-toothed girl with eyes full of hope. The other, a recent self-portrait, a woman with strength in her gaze, calm in her posture, dignity in her stance. Both were me. Both were true. Both deserved to be seen. I understood finally that family was not only the people who shared your blood, it was the people who showed up consistently, who believed in you when you could not, who held space for your grief and celebrated your victories without expectation. Family was chosen, cultivated, protected, and for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by it. The abandoned child I had been still lived within me. Quietly observing, I honored her courage, her resilience, and her determination to survive. But she no longer defined me. She was a part of my story, not its entirety. I had transformed abandonment into independence, rejection into self-reliance, loss into creativity. And in that transformation, I found peace. If you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way, share your idea. Story 2. My daughter said she would return in 2 hours after dropping off her 3 boys at my small apartment. She never came back. She sued me for kidnapping them 15 years later. However, the judge leaned back when I gave him an envelope. Are they aware of its contents? He inquired. Not yet, I said, as I sat in the courtroom, watching my daughter Rachel adjust her designer blazer with the same deliberate precision she'd used to desert her children. The envelope shuddered in my grizzled hands. 15 years ago, by the age of 62, I had come to understand the significance of the moments that would change everything, and the ability to shatter her meticulously crafted lie was contained in this manila envelope, which had been softly worn by my fingers as I traced its edges over innumerable restless nights. Remember to leave a comment where you're viewing from your honor and subscribe to the channel. His voice was as smooth as silk over shattered glass as Rachel's attorney spoke. For 15 years, my client has been deprived of her own children. She is accusing the defendant of kidnapping and is asking for immediate custody. Her own mom. Abduction in my mouth. The word tasted like rust. I felt the familiar ache in my lower back as I pressed my lips together. It brought back memories of innumerable nights spent in hospital chairs, keeping watch over 3 young boys who had whispered to me for their mother when they had fever dreams. Baby! Grandma is here. Grandma is present. Leaning forward was Judge Morrison, a man whose lined face and silver hair suggested he had witnessed every kind of human cruelty. You have been taking care of these kids since they were 3 years old. Mrs. Brown. Indeed. Your Honor. I spoke more steadily than I felt when I was behind Rachel. It was my boys that I saw. My 7-year-old grandson is taller than most adults in the courtroom, with his jaw clenched in a manner that painfully reminded me of their father. Daniel sat between his brothers. David gazed at the floor as though he could blend into the faded carpet, while Marcus folded his hands, his knuckles white. They were still unaware of the envelope. They were unaware of their mother's true actions. And the judge went on during this period. There was no communication with the mother. I carefully stated that she came twice. They asked for money once when they were 8 years old and once when they were 12, staying for 3 days before departing once more. I saw something flash as Rachel moved in her chair. Shame. Fear. Prior to putting her mask back on, she had always had a lovely appearance. My daughter. She still possessed that ethereal quality that made people want to keep her safe and believe whatever she said. even at the age of 38. Years had passed before I could see past that beauty to the calculating coldness beneath. The attorney cleared his throat. My client, Your Honor, was battling addiction and postpartum depression. She required time to recover. Her parental rights are unaffected by that. Depression following childbirth. As if that explained leaving behind 3 toddlers who, for months, cried themselves to sleep, who hid crackers beneath their beds out of fear that they wouldn't have food the next day, and who jumped at every sound because their developing brains couldn't tell the difference between footsteps that might bring their mother home and those that might take them away again. Judge Morrison's voice brought me back to the here and now. Mrs. Brown, do you have proof of guardianship on file? It was my time. I got up slowly. Hours of sitting on the hard wooden bench caused my knees to protest. Yes, Your Honor. But first I'd like to make a presentation. As I made my way to the front of the courtroom, I could feel Rachel's gaze piercing my back. Considering the weight of the contents, the envelope felt incredibly light in my hands. What is this? The judge accepted it from me and asked. Simply put, proof of what a mother is. As he opened the envelope, Judge Morrison's eyebrows went up. When he took out the first picture, I saw his face change. Daniel grinned broadly on his first day of kindergarten while displaying his brand new lunchbox. Marcus's ribbon for winning first place at the science fair. His 6-year-old face was streaming with happy tears. David is 7 years old. After his first successful bike ride without training wheels, he put his arms around my neck. It was more than just the pictures. Though, each of the report cards was meticulously stored in plastic sleeves. Every note I had ever written for a teacher conference. Field trip permission slips signed in my meticulous handwriting. My name is listed as the emergency contact in medical records. The guardian with permission. The person who supported them during feverish nights and fractured bones. Your Honor. Rachel's attorney stepped in. Judge Morrison said softly, but with enough grit in his voice that the lawyer instantly complied. Childhood memorabilia doesn't sit down. The judge kept going over the material. With each item, his face became more solemn. How long did it take you to put this together? Mrs. Brown, 15 years. I said. Their friends didn't know where their mother was, so they weren't invited to any school functions or birthday celebrations. When they made cards for their grandfather, my late husband, on Father's Day, they always ask her why she didn't call. They needed a father figure, and he was all they had until cancer took him away 5 years ago. One of my grandsons made a little noise that I heard. Anguish or acknowledgement, I didn't turn around. But I couldn't tell. I was unable to look at their faces. Not just yet. Judge Morrison displayed a specific picture, and I recognized it even from my vantage point. The 10-year-old boys in my small apartment, standing in front of our little Christmas tree. Due to financial constraints, they were dressed in matching pajamas that I had sewn myself. With their arms wrapped around one another, their faces glowed with the kind of unadulterated joy that only children can experience. When this was taken, "Where were you?" Rachel was asked directly by the judge. She stood up straight, and I noticed her poise faltering for the first time. I was organizing my life. I was unable to. Couldn't you send a card for Christmas? Call someone. He spoke in a level tone. But beneath Mrs. Brown, there was something perilous. Does this envelope contain anything else? I gave a nod. Your Honor, the school records, all the forms that needed to be signed by a parent, each emergency contact sheet, every 15-year permission slip. He produced a pile of papers. I was aware of what he was observing. My name, repeatedly in the area designated Mother Guardian. My number is in the emergency contact section. Everything from authorization for medical treatment to permission for field trips has my signature. Additionally, these forms include your daughter's name. How frequently? Never. Honor. Not once. I could hear the old radiator in the corner of the courtroom humming because it was so quiet. Rachel shook her head when her attorney whispered something urgent in her ear. She had a pale face. Judge Morrison carefully placed the envelope on his desk. I have one more question. Mrs. Brown, are your grandsons aware of the contents of this envelope? I steadily looked into his eyes. Not just yet. What's the reason behind that? Because some realities are too much for kids to handle. Even after those kids are almost adults. Because I had shielded them from the fact that their mother hadn't simply abandoned them for 15 years. Because I wanted them to have the opportunity to get to know their mother without the burden of my judgment. She had completely erased herself from their lives, leaving an ET a single piece of paper with her name on it in every school office. I said, however, they are now old enough to comprehend the reality. I could tell by the judge's expression that he had already made up his mind as he leaned back in his chair. But Rachel got up suddenly before he could say anything. Her voice broke as she said, I made mistakes. They are still my children. Though, they were born to me. I adore them. I glanced at her, then gave her a serious look. She was actually crying. Not the contrived feeling she had mastered over the years. She briefly reminded me of the daughter I had raised. The one who had called me at 3 a.m. to tell me she was expecting and who had frightened the young woman who had assured me she would make a good mother. The weight of 3 tiny bodies curled up against me during thunderstorms. Though, came back to me. They had begun calling me Mammogram when they were 5 years old because I was the only mother they had ever truly known. And I could see the pride in their eyes when I cheered at their baseball games. Love is not a feeling, I said softly. It's up to you to decide. Each and every day. Slowly. Judge Morrison nodded. Please take a step back. Mrs. Brown, I have to talk to the boys. As I watched my grandson stand, my heart pounded against my chest. The dark eyes and obstinate jaw of their father. 3 faces that were exactly alike. However, there was a hint of me in their shoulders, the way they drew closer to one another in a protective manner. I held my breath as they got closer to the bench. Daniel. David. Marcus. The judge said softly. I understand that this is challenging, but I must ask you directly. Would you like to move in with your mom? The silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, Daniel, always the spokesman for his brothers, cleared his throat. Your Honor, he said in a deeper voice than I had anticipated. She is not someone we truly know. Like a death sentence. Those 6 words lingered in the atmosphere. I saw Rachel flinch as if she'd been struck. Saw her lawyer close his eyes in defeat. But it was what Daniel said next that would haunt me for the rest of my life. However, we would like the opportunity to try. I set down 3 mugs of hot chocolate. A ritual I'd followed every evening for 15 years. And the words reverberated in the abrupt silence of my small apartment. They were given a 2-week trial period as a result of Daniel's declaration in court, during which Rachel had 2 weeks to determine whether or not they wanted to continue dating the mother who had abandoned them when they were still in diapers. Grandma, you're trembling. Marcus noted that he was always sensitive to the feelings of others and had a gentle disposition. He had inherited his father's analytical mind at the age of 17. But he also had an empathy that occasionally alarmed me. For boys who felt too strongly, the world could be cruel. He was correct. I realized as I glanced down at my hands. As I put the ceramic mug down, it clattered against the saucer. I'm all right. My love. No. You're not. In 3rd grade. David, who was 12 minutes younger than the others but frequently the most direct, developed the nervous habit of pushing his glasses up his nose. You haven't been okay since yesterday's court. They were sitting on my old couch, which I had bought used when they were 5 years old and which instantly became the world's greatest fort-building material. A faint stain remained from Marcus spilling grape juice during a particularly intense game of Monopoly, and the fabric was worn thin where their knees had dug in during innumerable movie nights. Boys, I said, taking my time, getting comfortable in my armchair, the one that faced the couch so I could keep an eye on them at all times. I want you to know that you have my support no matter what you decide. My tongue tasted bitter from the lie. However, Some lies are required. Shields. How could I let them know that it felt like death to think of Rachel taking them? That their absence would reverberate throughout this apartment, which I had already mentally mapped out. Daniel muttered. She wants us to move to Seattle with her and her boyfriend. A boyfriend? In court? Rachel had made a passing reference to him. She had been dating an investment banker for 8 months, and she believed that stability would be sufficient to move the boys out of the only house they had ever known. She displayed images of the house to us. It has a pool. Marcus continued. As if square footage could quantify love in our own rooms. As if 15 years of abandonment could be erased by chlorinated water. David added. But his tone was unenthusiastic. We could redecorate however we wanted. She said. I nodded while maintaining a neutral expression as my heart broke like old paper. Grandma. That sounds good. Daniel leaned forward, his dark eyes as serious as his father's. Despite his advanced age, why didn't you tell us everything at once, like an accusation? He pointed to the envelope that was now resting on my kitchen table. Judge Morrison had given me permission to take his ruling home with me. The boys needed the whole truth before they could make a decision. I said slowly. Children shouldn't have to carry their parents' failures. Which made me dread this conversation for 2 days. Marcus whispered. We're no longer kids. Of course. He was correct. They had matured into young men somewhere between teaching them how to drive my old Honda Civic and helping them with their algebra homework. Now they were taller than me. They have a deep voice. Their face displays the sharp lines of impending adulthood. In my heart, though, they were still 3-year-olds with tear-streaked cheeks who wanted to know when their mother would return home. No, I concurred. You're not. I stood there and picked up the envelope, running my fingers over its well-known edges. The weight of every decision I'd made, every sacrifice I'd made, and every restless night was contained within. In addition to pictures and documents, I had always put their welfare ahead of my own comfort. When you were born, your mother was 23 years old. I started to recline in my chair. Not as old as you are now. Your father, may he rest in peace, served abroad, with me and 3 babies. She was by herself. I let her down. Under pressure, the words came out as shattered as glass. I had never said this out loud. Not even to myself. What are you saying? David inquired. At the time, I had 2 jobs. We were struggling to pay the medical bills after your grandfather was recently diagnosed with his first case of cancer. When Rachel called in tears, she said she was at her breaking point. I advised her to strengthen herself. I explained to her that being a mother meant making sacrifices. I took out a picture that I had never shown them before. Gaunt and hollow-eyed. Rachel, Arsha C., held the 3 of them as they screamed. She appeared to be a specter of herself. I went on. I should have realized she was drowning. I ought to have taken up residence, taken time off from work. Instead, something. While she was crumbling in her kitchen, I offered her advice from mine. Daniel said that doesn't justify what she did, and I was painfully reminded of myself by the steel in his voice. It explains it, but it doesn't. I agree. Your mom didn't simply leave you. The aspect of herself that was failing you was abandoned by her. Some people flee from their problems, while others run toward them. Rachel took off running. Tears were streaming down Marcus's cheeks as he sobbed silently. David had become extremely still, as he always did when he was dealing with challenging feelings. Daniel's hands were fisted and his jaw was clenched. So why return now? Daniel inquired. How come I'm suing you for kidnapping? I had hoped to avoid this part, but they were entitled to the truth. I extracted a folder that I had kept apart from the others by reaching into the envelope. Just last month, I received legal documents. A life insurance policy was owned by your father, I said in a low voice. A big one. Since your mother was listed as your guardian, it was intended to be released when you turned 18. With her as the beneficiary, the ensuing silence was deafening. David muttered, She's only here for the money. We're not positive about that. Indeed, we do. With a start. Daniel got up and paced toward the window overlooking the tiny courtyard where I had taught them how to ride bicycles. Grandma, the timing isn't a coincidence. Is it? In 3 months. We will turn 18. 3 months. The number hung like a countdown clock between us. I mentioned something else. I hated myself for what I was going to show. 6 months ago, she submitted the necessary paperwork to have me deemed an unfit guardian. But she didn't serve it until now. Why, Marcus inquired. But I could tell by the look in his eyes that he already knew, as she would immediately regain custody if I was determined to be unfit. She would also have instant access to the insurance money as your legal guardian. Not when you're 18. They were physically struck by the betrayal. I saw as the last remnants of their youthful optimism vanished from their faces and were replaced by something colder and harder. They appeared to have aged years in a matter of seconds. David stated bluntly that she never wanted us back. She desired the cash. Her intentions are unknown to us. Even I found the words to be hollow. But I said them. Give up shielding her. Daniel turned to me and snapped. Give up defending us. Grandma, we're not infants anymore. The truth is manageable for us. He was correct. But it was difficult to control the protective instinct I had developed over the previous 15 years. I had forgotten they were capable of handling Rachel's abandonment because I had been protecting them from it for so long. You're right, I muttered. I apologize. Daniel's rage rose and then fell as fast as it had appeared, taking my hands in his much larger ones. He knelt next to my chair after crossing the room. Don't say you're sorry for loving us. I felt tears that I had been suppressing for days as the simple words caused something inside of me to burst. At last. Spill over. These boys. For 15 years. These young men had dominated my life. I had devoted my entire being to raising them. Had given up my social life. My retirement funds. And my personal goals in order to provide them with security and affection. And in spite of the conditions of their early years, they had developed into extraordinary human beings. Now what? Marcus questioned quietly. I straightened my shoulders and wiped my eyes. You now have a decision to make. And I will respect your decision regardless of what you decide. Even if we decide to pick her, David inquired. Even as the question pierced my heart, I steadily met his gaze. For that was the true nature of love. Not ownership, but the readiness to let go when it was best for the other person, even if it meant destroying you in the process. Daniel said, We need some time. I nodded. Understanding. To think. They made their way to their shared bedroom. The tiny room where I had somehow crammed 3 twin beds and all of their 17 years' worth of possessions. Through the thin wall, I could hear their voices. Low and solemn. The sound of boys growing into men in the course of one conversation. In my living room, surrounded by the reminders of our shared life. I sat by myself. There are family photos everywhere, and their school awards on the wall. The disarray of schoolwork and athletic gear somehow gave the small room a homey feel. A text message buzzed on my phone. When I dropped them off, Rachel. The boy appeared distressed. I hope they aren't being poisoned against me. We must speak before they make a decision. Is it possible for us to meet tomorrow? I gazed at the message for a while, feeling a sharp, cold sensation solidify in my chest. She desired to speak. She wanted to talk after I had been silent for 15 years, and after a legal battle that had cost me my last savings after someone tried to take the children I had raised. Rosewood Café de Paix. M. is what I typed back. After that, I put the phone away and started organizing my daughter's last lesson in consequences. When Rachel was 16 and still called me Mom, the Rosewood Cafe had been her favorite spot. I purposefully chose my first name rather than using it carelessly because I wanted her to remember who she was before greed hardened her heart into something unidentifiable. As I worked the evening shift at the diner across the street, I got there early and took the corner table where she used to do her homework. I didn't miss the irony. After working several jobs throughout her childhood to support her, I watched her desert her own kids. At precisely 2:00 p.m., when things started to get tough, Rachel arrived in a cream-colored coat that most likely cost more than I had spent on groceries in the previous 3 months. Although she had always been stunning, she now had an unnatural appearance, like a photo that had been heavily photoshopped. I had to concede that she was suited to success. Even if it was based on ignoring her obligations, she slid into the seat across from me and said, "Mom." She sounded as though she had practiced the words in front of the mirror. "Rachel." I studied her face and spoke in a neutral tone. She still had a youthful appearance at 38, but she had wrinkles around her eyes. Unable to conceal well, maybe guilt, or simply the passing of time, she requested an oat milk skinny latte. She did. Of course, some things remained the same. Even though I continued to drink black coffee, the boy appeared perplexed. When the waitress was gone, she started, "I can tell you've been trying to convince them of your version of what happened. As though there were different ways to interpret abandonment and the truth could be negotiated." I gave them the truth. Nothing more. I uttered quietly. There are various ways to present facts. Her voice took on the wheedling tone I remembered from her adolescence when she was demanding something. And she leaned forward. "You must realize that after they were born, I was ill. A legitimate medical condition is postpartum depression. For 15 years, you were unable to call." The question hung like a blade between us. I briefly noticed something raw in Rachel's eyes as her well-planned explanation fell apart. Perhaps fear, or the realization that her lies would not affect me in the same way that they had her lawyer. She whispered, "I wanted to, but it got harder the longer I stayed away. How do you explain the recent departure of their mother to 3 young boys? You don't give an explanation." I said, "You're sorry. You return home. The work is done by you. I had a life to build. You were fleeing." I felt a sense of finality and coldness, but my voice stayed steady, occupying my chest. "And you're back now, because you need money for that life you created." Rachel's cheeks turned red. Money isn't the issue here." I took a folder that I had made that morning out of my purse, printouts of everything I had looked up after the court hearing, including public records and social media, like tarot cards. I laid them out on the little table, exposing a bleak future. "The federal government is looking into your boyfriend's investment company. Conversationally," I said, "all of his assets are frozen. You've been living on maxed-out credit cards and in a home you can't afford. The payments on your car are 3 months past due." Rachel's face turned pale as she gazed at the papers. "How did you?" Despite my advanced age, I'm not a moron. I gave one of the papers a tap. 2 months ago, the week you served me with custody papers, you filed for bankruptcy protection." The cafe was crowded around us, and the happy voices of other customers created a surreal background to our altercation. The foam in Rachel's latte dissolved into beige mediocrity, leaving it unaltered. "Even if it were true," she reaffirmed, "the fact that they are my children remains unchanged. I am entitled to certain rights." Rights. The word had a spoiled taste to it. What rights did they have in relation to a mother who appeared? Rachel, the right to receive birthday greetings and the knowledge that they were desired. I erred. "You made decisions." I carefully collected the papers and put them back in my purse. "Daily for 15 years. You made the decision not to call, write a letter, or inquire about their well-being. I believed it was better for them without me." "No. You believed that living without them was better for you." The statement's veracity struck her like a blow to the body. I saw her poise falter and the mask slightly lift to show the self-centered girl who had always been hiding behind my daughter's attractive exterior. "What are you looking for from me?" she muttered. "I want you to go." "I am unable to do that. The insurance money is what I need." "Yes. I am aware of that." I reclined in my chair and looked at her face. "This is what will take place. Your custody petition will be withdrawn. You're going to leave my grandsons alone and go back to Seattle to inform your boyfriend that the money won't be coming. What if I don't? I had been building toward this moment for the past 2 restless nights of planning, researching, and getting ready for battle. Once more, I took out a different folder from my purse. This one is thicker, more substantial. I'll then ruin you. Rachel chuckled. It sounds like glass shattering. With what you are, a woman of 62 who lives in a studio apartment. How could you? I started arranging the photos after opening the folder. It was something completely different from the adorable family moments I'd shown the judge in the envelope. Screenshots from hotel receipts, credit card statements, and social media posts that were all acquired by a private investigator. I had paid with my last $1,000 using entirely legal methods. You and Carbo in the spring of last year, pointing to a picture of Rachel on a yacht with a champagne glass raised in celebration, I said in a conversational manner. Marcus was hospitalized that same week due to pneumonia. For you? I called all the numbers I had. You didn't respond. Rachel's complexion darkened. This is your trip-related credit card statement. 15美元. 000 for shopping and spa services. In order to pay his medical bills, I worked double shifts. I went on to the next document. And this one is really fascinating. 3 years ago, you were married to a man named Robert Hastings. It seems that you have been married the entire time, not merely seeing your boyfriend. How did you public documents? When you actually bother to look, you'll be amazed at what you can find. I laid out additional papers. By the way, the person being investigated by the federal government is your husband, Robert. Charged like tax evasion, money laundering, and wire fraud carry severe jail sentences. Rachel's hands were flat on the table and she was trembling. What are you looking for? I want you to fully comprehend something. My voice dipped to hardly more than a whisper as I spoke. For 15 years, those boys have been my entire universe. I've given up everything. My retirement, my health, my social life, and my savings to give them the security you are unable to offer. I won't allow you to re-enter their lives and ruin them for financial gain. They expressed a desire to give it a shot. The reason they said that was because they are good boys with good hearts who secretly hope that their mother will love them. You and I both know that's not why you're here. But I started gathering the papers. I can prove everything. You can't. I snapped the folder shut. Your marriage, your financial status, and your total absence from their lives until it made financial sense to go back. Every lie you told in court is documented for me. Rachel looked at me as though she had never seen me before. The person who reared me is no longer you. No. I concurred. That woman was too willing to believe that people could change. Too forgiving. And too trusting. I held my purse on my shoulder. Putting 3 kids to bed every night for 15 years has shaped the woman who is currently seated across from you. Their mother didn't love them enough to stay. They questioned. Yes. I adore them. Rachel. Love is not an emotion. Love is emerging. Love requires sacrifice. Love is prioritizing the needs of another person over your own. Even when it's difficult. Particularly when it's challenging. I gave her a downward glance. Despite having my blood, this stranger lacked my morals. You have no idea what love is. Her voice stopped me as I turned to go. What if we get into a fight? What happens if I file a lawsuit? She must have been alarmed by my expression when I turned around because she pushed herself back into her chair. I'll then take it all to the press. The children who were left behind, the criminal husband, the bankruptcy, and the missing mother who came back for money. Everything. And I'll make sure the boys understand exactly what their mother is like after your reputation is ruined. Your husband is imprisoned, and you are left with nothing. You wouldn't treat them that way. Give me a try. Rachel was sitting by herself among the wreckage of her meticulously crafted lies when I left the cafe and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. Now my hands were steady, and I knew what I was doing. She had 15 years to establish her maternal status. She now had 15 hours to demonstrate that she was intelligent enough to leave, However, I knew with icy certainty that she wouldn't go quietly as I drove home to my grandsons. Rachel and others never did. Before the world said no, they had to constantly push to test limits and see how much they could handle. Luckily, I was prepared for whatever was ahead. At 6047 a.m., the call was received. I was startled by my first good night's sleep in weeks. The panic that comes from being the emergency contact for 3 active boys for 17 years made my heart race as I fumbled for my phone. Brown. Mrs. It was a businesslike voice. Cut. I'm calling regarding your daughter, Rachel Brown Hastings. And this is Detective Sarah Martinez from the Seattle Police Department. Before she spoke again, the formal tone told me all I needed to know. My bare feet hit the chilly hardwood floor as I sat up in bed. What has occurred? She was taken into custody last night on suspicion of involvement in her husband's federal case. Conspiracy, money laundering, and wire fraud. She wants you to get in touch with her lawyer. I felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction as I closed my eyes. Calm down in my chest. More akin to inevitable. Like watching a house that was built on sand from the start fall apart. Are you there? Mrs. Brown, I'm present. Looking out at the courtyard where my grandsons used to play, I made my way to my window. Investigator, you must comprehend something for me. I am estranged from my daughter. I don't intend to get in touch with her lawyer or offer any kind of support. A pause occurred. You'd say that, she said. She asked me to let you know that, in return for legal counsel, she is willing to sign custody documents. The boldness was stunning, even from a prison cell. In order to find a position that suited her needs, Rachel was attempting to negotiate, as though she could exchange her freedom for the custody of the boys she had left behind. I carefully said, "Tell my daughter that I'll be in contact." After hanging up, I sat quietly in my tiny apartment and watched dust particles move through the thin walls as the morning light danced. The familiar sounds of 3 young men getting ready for school were disturbed by my grandson. Daniel's cautious movements as he attempted to avoid waking his brothers. Marcus's soft humming while he showered. And David's whispered grumbles about his calculus homework. They were unaware at the time. After any scandal involving money or treachery, their phones would begin to buzz with social media notifications and news alerts within a few hours. On the evening news, their classmates would see the mugshot of their mother. Their teachers would gaze upon them with that special mixture of curiosity and sympathy that is reserved for the offspring of criminals. Boys. I had to tell them first. I tapped on their bedroom door and called softly. "Are you able to come out here? We must speak." They came out at different readiness levels. Daniel was dressed for school. Marcus wearing pajamas. In a t-shirt. David's hair is sticking up at the most inconceivable angles. "Take a look at my face." Told them that schedules and chores had nothing to do with this. I said softly. "Sit down." They took their places on the couch. 3 identical faces with 3 identical worried expressions. They moved together even at the age of 17. Relying on instinct and years of practice to support one another. Without introducing myself, I said, "Your mother was arrested last night. The cleanest cut is sometimes the kindest presets." The ensuing silence was profound. I observed them as they processed the data, saw their faces light up with emotion. Startled. Perplexed. Then there appeared to be a sort of relief. For what purpose, Daniel inquired. At last, financial offenses pertaining to her husband's company. Fraud via wire. Laundering of money. With my hands folded in my lap, I took a seat across from them. There will be news about it. It's likely that your classmates will see it before you arrive at school. It was Marcus who spoke first. His voice was steady but quiet. Will she end up behind bars? I'm not sure. Most likely. I was heartbroken by David's familiar gesture of adjusting his glasses. What becomes of us, nothing is altered. I spoke firmly. You are 17 years old. Nearly grown-ups. For as long as you want. This is your home. Letters of acceptance to colleges are waiting for you. Your mother's decisions have no bearing on your future. She desired that we relocate to Seattle. Marcus whispered alongside her. She desired the money from the insurance. Daniel clarified in a firm tone. The only way to get to it was through us. He was correct. But the bitterness in his tone made me cringe. I am aware that this is challenging. No. Daniel paced to the window and suddenly stood up. It's not hard. It provides clarification. 25 years ago, she didn't want us. She no longer wants us. The rest is just a detail. When his brothers nodded, I noticed something unexpected. They felt a sort of grim peace, as though a question they had been carrying around all their lives had finally been definitively answered. Rather than sadness or anger, Grandma David spoke slowly. What did you do? It was a surprise question. What are you saying? When you went to meet her yesterday, Marcus said, you knew this was going to happen. You had a new appearance. Determined. I looked at their faces. No one in the world knew me as well as these boys. Their grandfather's intuition and their father's intelligence had been passed down to them. Naturally, they had observed. I offered her an option. Finally, I told her to either leave willingly or accept the repercussions of her behavior. She also didn't go. Daniel watched. She didn't. In fact, you ruined her. Then, like an accusation, the words lingered in the air. I awaited the condemnation, the horror, and the dismay that their grandmother had developed the capacity for such premeditated cruelty. Rather, David grinned. A tiny, melancholy smile that somehow expressed both approval and grief. Excellent. Silently, he said. David. Grandma? No. She was our mother for 15 years. 15 years to call, visit, and provide care. Instead, she tries to separate us from the only parent we've ever truly known when she shows up right before our inheritance. He raised his voice. Once more. You kept us safe. Marcus gave a nod. How were you aware of her husband? After some hesitation, I concluded that they were entitled to the truth. In the wake of the custody hearing, I engaged a private investigator. I had to know why she had actually returned. It must have cost a lot of money. It was my last $1,000. Daniel said. I gave a shrug. Well spent money. They looked at each other in that silent exchange that had always astounded me. At last, Marcus spoke for everyone. Boys, we're not attending school today. It is impossible to miss. Daniel firmly stated. We're staying at home with you. It will be difficult enough today without having to answer questions from teachers and fellow students. David's hand was already on his phone. For all of us. I'll call in sick. I wanted to voice my disapproval and demand that they stick to their regular schedule. In actuality, though, I was just as much in need of them as they were of me. My phone would ring within a few hours. Social workers, lawyers, reporters, and well-meaning neighbors who had watched the news. That storm would be easier to face with my grandsons at my side. All right, I replied. But we're going to do something productive today. Applications to colleges, scholarship, essays, making plans for the future. Daniel leaned back on the couch and said, Speaking of which, what happens to the insurance money when we turn 18? This is the question I've been dreading. You own it. Everything. Your father wished for you to be financially stable throughout your time in college and beyond. What is the amount? David inquired. Sufficient to cover college expenses. At any school where you are accepted. Sufficient to begin your adult lives debt-free. I hesitated long enough for your mother to decide that ruining our family was worth it in order to obtain it. I had been thinking about the $2 million split 3 ways ever since I first heard about the policy. I had never seen so much money. Enough to provide these boys with opportunities that I could never offer myself. Surely she can't get it now with the arrest. Marcus inquired. No. She is unable to claim guardianship due to her legal issues. And before her case is settled, you will be adults. For the first time in weeks, I felt true satisfaction and smiled. Your father's money will be used for his son's futures just as he intended. Just as the caller ID displayed a Seattle number, I didn't recognize Mrs. Brown. My phone rang. It was a smooth voice. Expert. This is Rachel Brown Hastings' lawyer. James Morrison. My client wants to talk about the conditions of signing over custody. In return for... Before he could finish, her lawyer. I hung up. Danielle inquired. Indeed. What was it he desired? I gazed at my grandsons. These extraordinary young men who had persevered through uncertainty and abandonment to develop into strong, moral individuals. They have a right to know the precise conclusion of their mother's story. Your mother wants to exchange you for a lawyer. I was direct. If I pay for her defense, she'll sign away her parental rights. The ensuing quiet was not the same as it had been. Coldly angry, but not shocked or hurt. What will you say to him? David inquired. As a precaution, I went to my desk and took out a piece of paper, the same legal document I had prepared weeks earlier. A detailed accounting of all the costs I'd incurred in raising Rachel's children, as well as a formal statement denying any financial responsibility for her legal issues. I'll let him know exactly how much his client is worth to me, I said as I grabbed my pen. Nothing. I watched through reinforced glass as Rachel was taken away in handcuffs 6 months later in the Seattle Federal Courthouse corridor. In some way, the orange jumpsuit made her appear smaller. With good behavior, the judge had stated that she would be sentenced to 18 months to 3 years after the jury found her guilty on all counts in less than 4 hours. In 15 months, she might be gone. By that time, my grandsons would be sophomores in college, creating lives that were largely influenced by the decisions they made each day rather than the woman who had given birth to them. A reporter named Mrs. Brown shoved a microphone in my face. Regarding your daughter's conviction, what are your thoughts? The boys back home in Portland were likely watching this moment on the evening news from their dorm rooms at 3 different universities as I stared straight into the camera. Simply put, justice is rarely satisfying, I said. However, it's essential. After leaving the courthouse, I got into my car. It was a dependable used Subaru that I had purchased with money from an unexpected source, not the antiquated Honda. To make sure I had reliable, safe transportation, the boys had insisted and used a portion of their insurance inheritance. When he gave me the keys, Grandma Daniel said, "You have provided us with everything. We'll give it to you." It took me 4 hours to drive back to Portland, which allowed me to think about all that had changed since I had first taken out the old envelope in the courtroom that morning. Now that there were no 3 teenagers living there, the apartment felt different, quieter, but not deserted. They called every Sunday without fail, and their voices could still be heard everywhere, alternating. As a result, I received at least one message every week. Marcus was a Stanford pre-med student. His kind disposition was ideal for the healing career he had selected. David had pursued his passion for technology to MIT, where his instructors were astounded by his natural grasp of intricate systems. Additionally, Daniel was a journalism student at Northwestern University, concentrating on investigative reporting. "Like you did with Mom," he said. "I want to reveal the truth." As I unlocked the door to my apartment, my phone rang. Daniel's phone number. We saw the news. "Grandma, you all." Marcus convened a meeting. "All of us are present." In the background, I heard voices, my voice in unison. Even though they are dispersed throughout the nation, there were benefits to modern technology. "How do you feel?" It was Marcus. As usual, his voice was soft. To be honest, I was relieved. There is a weight to closure. "Excellent." David spoke in a firm tone. "She made her decisions. She will now be able to live with them." After a pause, Daniel resumed his speech. "We have something to share with you. Grandma, for weeks, we have been organizing this." My heart skipped a beat. 63. The boys I'd raised had taught me to be suspicious of surprises. They were inclined to make big gestures. Marcus said, "We're all taking a plane home for Thanksgiving. It's not a surprise. Though, we purchased a home," David declared. "We did. However, make an offer. 2 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms. We could all cook together in a real kitchen." I leaned back in my chair, the one that had seen innumerable late-night chats and homework sessions. "Boys, it's in your name." Daniel cut me off. "Paid for in full. We spent the money we inherited. Additionally, keep in mind that Dad's insurance was intended to protect our futures before you argue. Grandma, you are a part of our future. It always has." Unexpected tears started to fall down my cheeks. "You can't just..." "We did already," Marcus said softly. "Next month is the closing date. To move you in. We'll all be home over the winter break. However," David said, "your education is paid for. We have enough money set aside for living expenses, tuition, and other things. The house money is kept apart." "Grandma, this was meticulously planned. The best taught us." I reflected on everything I had given up over the years. The meals they missed in order to eat them, and the used clothing in order to purchase new school supplies. Their dreams had been financed by an empty savings account. They had been observing, learning, and comprehending the true meaning of family. I could hear Daniel's smile as he added, "Besides, when our future wives visit their grandmother-in-law, we'll need a place to take them. That kind of intimidation is completely inappropriate in this tiny apartment." Through my tears, I laughed as I imagined these 3 amazing young men bringing partners home one day and carrying on the tradition of love and protection that had characterized our small family. Marcus whispered, "There's something else. After some discussion, we have decided to legally adopt the last name Brown. Your name." The 15 years of shared history weighed heavily on the silence that hung between us, as they had already claimed me in their hearts. They were paying me the utmost respect by claiming me as their mother-in-law. "Are you certain?" I muttered. Daniel stated resolutely, "We've never been more certain of anything. In every important way, you are our mother." It's time that reality was reflected in the paperwork. Overwhelmed by how complete this moment was, I closed my eyes. Rachel had lost everything: her children, her freedom, her money, and her dignity. She had unintentionally given me the best present imaginable. Unquestionably, the boys I had raised were aware of the distinction between the woman who had given birth to them and the woman who genuinely loved them. "How about the name of your father?" I inquired. "His family name was Thompson." "Let's hyphenate," David stated. "Both legacies will be carried on by Thompson Chin. Your sacrifice and your father's love." 3 months later, I was standing in our new home's kitchen. A cozy, inviting area with granite worktops and windows overlooking a garden where I had already made plans to plant vegetables. When the boys were home for winter break, the house was filled with chaos, laughter, and that special kind of loving noise that only family can make. Daniel had his laptop open at the kitchen table, working on a piece about grandparents filling the void left by parental abandonment. He told me it's an epidemic. "What you accomplished for us. To raise their children's children. Millions of grandparents are giving up their golden years." David was learning how to make their grandfather's renowned wontons from Marcus. As they worked, their heads were hunched over the kitchen counter. The website filled my heart with joy. Tradition and continuity. Generation after generation of love. A text message from an unknown number buzzed through my phone. I opened it against my better judgment. "Please, I need to try to make things right, even though I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Rachel. The boys are also my kids. From prison." She had managed to send me a message. It was breathtakingly audacious. I showed Daniel the message even now, and he read it with the same icy dispassion he applied to his research. "What are you interested in doing?" he inquired. I glanced around our cozy, busy kitchen. At Marcus. carefully correcting David's folding technique, at the refrigerator brimming with pictures from graduation, college acceptance letters, and family dinners, and at the proof of a life well lived and a love well loved. Despite everything, I said, erasing the communication. She was given the opportunity to become their mother. Instead, she went for cash. And us, Daniel inquired. What did we decide, grinning? I drew him into an embrace that somehow fit all three of my boys. Together, we had endured hardships, persevered, and prospered over the years. I said, you chose love. You went with family. You both picked each other. I felt something I had never felt before that evening as we sat around our new dining room table, exchanging wontons, stories, and future plans. Total tranquility. After raising 3 abandoned toddlers in a small apartment, the woman had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. Although she had never meant to, Rachel had given me one last lesson. Giving someone the chance to find their own strength can occasionally be the best gift you can give them. Her desertion had compelled me to take on the role of protector and mother she had never been. She had never made the decision to serve as the cornerstone upon which these boys had built their extraordinary lives. I realized that there had been no need for retaliation as I turned to face my sons around the table. For that was what they were now. Fully and legally. Rachel was not punished with a jail term, financial ruin, or public humiliation. Missing this was her punishment. I missed Marcus's excitement as he discussed his interviews for medical school. I'm missing David's enthusiasm for his tech startup internship. I missed Daniel's fervent social justice defense during the dinner conversation. The lack of love was her penalty. Where family should have been, there was a gap. Where there should have been laughter, there was silence. She had exchanged everything she valued for money she would never be able to keep. She had given me the best gift of all by doing this. The unwavering conviction that I was the mother these boys had been waiting for. I came to see that justice wasn't always about punishment. At times, it was just a matter of picking love, choosing to stay when others fled, making sacrifices when others preferred convenience, and choosing selfishness when others chose to run, now and forever. The boys were all mine. They had me. 2. That was sufficient justice.